more than 20 years, Christine has worked with hundreds of leaders in high-tech, medical products, and other industries, leading positive change. Beginning in 2007, she turned her attention to future talent, today's students, with her study of adolescent learning, appreciating beauty in the bottom 80th percentile. She holds a master in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA from Cornell. She and her husband, David, have 2 daughters, Catherine and Lauren, and live outside of Boston. With that, I'd like to welcome Christine Duvivier.
Thanks, Brianna. There's something you should know about me. I met my husband in our MBA program, in the keg line. Now, I don't tell you that because we're big drinkers. I tell you that because we've always been big in business. MBA, business, 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 business. That was our focus, business. So imagine his face when I sat down with him at the kitchen table one night and I said, honey, I'd like to go back to school. There's a program I found that I'm really excited about. He said, oh, what kind of a business program is it? Is it accounting, finance, technology? I said, no, honey. I'd like to study the art of positive psychology. Have you ever had someone look at you like, who are you? Where'd you go? Or more importantly, when are you coming back? He said to me, what is this positive psychology? I said, honey, it's the study of human flourishing, of blossoming, of happiness. He said, so how much does all this blossoming and flourishing cost? So I gave him the numbers. And he said, well, I guess they're running a good business. But in the end, we did agree that I'd go back. Is this a little loud? Sorry. We agreed that I'd go back. Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if I was causing a problem with the microphone. Anyway, we agreed that I'd go back. And even though I had actually studied positive psychology on my own for many, many years, I wanted to make it formal. I decided to go back to school for that. And so I began studying about motivation. That's what I was particularly interested in, how you bring out the highest levels of motivation. And one of the things that I learned is that no matter where you are in life right now, you can make a positive change. So I began bringing what I was learning back to the business leaders that I work with and the organizations that I work with. And it was really a very heady, very exciting time. It was more fun than I'd ever had in my career. And then something happened out of the blue. It changed everything, and it's the reason we're here tonight. A boy I know died by suicide. His name was Sam. He was in his senior year of high school, 18 years old. I was driving in my car one afternoon. I picked up my phone. My daughter Lauren was on the line. And she said, Mom, Sam's gone. Suicide. And it just sucked the life right out of me. I knew Sam. They had dated in their freshman year of high school. He was a great kid. He was bright. He was interested in computers. He had lots of friends. But he was the only student that year who wasn't going to college. He didn't want to. His parents later told me that he hated school. Now, I don't know exactly why Sam did what he did, but I do know that a lot of kids feel stuck, feel like they can't figure out how to find their potential, don't know where they fit in school or in life. And so after I got the news about Sam, I found that I just couldn't finish the research project that I had started. I was looking at motivation in leaders and how to bring out the highest potential in people in a business organization, and it just didn't feel meaningful to me at that moment. And so I muddled around for a while, and then I realized maybe I could take what I was learning and all that I had learned about how you bring out the highest potential in people, how you help people to make a positive change. And maybe if I could do that, maybe if I could apply that to kids like Sam, that might make some difference. So that's what I decided to do. I went off and I did that research, and we'll talk about that tonight. And by the time you walk out of here, you'll have a better understanding of how to bring out hidden gifts and strengths in students, how to bring out the potential in kids like Sam, and how to set them up for what are potentially great careers in life. So let me just talk to you for a moment about the study itself. I looked at teens in the bottom 80% of their classes. It was that arbitrary, okay, bottom 80%. I looked at their character strengths, and let me just explain for a moment that character strengths are in the realm, the moral domain, basically, and they are a set of 24 strengths that have been identified by Chris Peterson at University of Michigan and Marty Seligman at University of Pennsylvania. They're a set of 24 strengths that are pretty much universally valued. So every major world religion, every major country, they've been tested. These are the things that we think are good about human beings. That's character strengths. I also wanted to look at the kids' innate gifts. Okay, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But I said that character strengths are in the moral domain, and gifts basically are other innate abilities, not necessarily in the moral domain. Okay.
Can I?
Sure.
The bottom 80% by their GPA, is that?
Yeah, or the class rank. You know, where do they stand in their class?
Okay,
Yes.
all right,
Yep,
thank you
yep.
very much.
Okay, so bottom 80%. Here are some of the strengths, character strengths that I found in these kids. Honesty, bravery, citizenship and loyalty, that's the same strength. Love, kindness, fairness, creativity, and judgment. Now, I should explain that I'm not saying that all kids in the bottom 80% have all of these strengths. All right? And not every kid in my sample had all of these strengths. But these are the ones that came out most frequently in the group that I looked at. And the reason that I show them here is that the thing about character strengths is that all of them are good. Okay? There's no bad strengths, and it doesn't matter if you have one and not another. Okay? These are ways of defining what's good about us. And until we had this language, in psychology, we really had very good ways of labeling what's wrong with you or what's wrong with a kid, but we didn't have a way of talking about what's right with them. So as you look at these strengths, aren't these strengths that you would love to see in a student no matter how they're doing in school? Any strength up there you wouldn't love to see in a kid? Any questions on what these strengths are? I think they're probably pretty straightforward, but I should mention judgment is like judgment and critical thinking, looking at things from a lot of angles. Okay? And I mean, one of the things we say in school is that from school you're going to develop critical thinking skills. Right? Is that something you hear? Anybody else hear that? And yet some of these kids innately have the ability to use judgment and critical thinking, even though they're not necessarily top students. Okay, I also found 8 gifts that conflict with school. I want to talk to you a little bit about these. The first one is visioning. So these are people who think in pictures. Now, I know you all know the adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, so think about that. If you're thinking in pictures, if it's like a movie running through your mind, how many pictures are you processing in a minute? I don't know. Who's in the movie business here? Okay, but certainly tens, if not hundreds, of pictures in a minute. Do you know how fast a person reads? How many words per minute you read? Anybody? Ballpark guess? Yeah, it's actually a little bit less than that, but it's probably a couple hundred. And, I mean, well, you might be a speed reader, Karen. So people who read really fast might get in 500 words a minute. But it's probably a couple hundred words a minute. But it really doesn't matter for our purposes, because think about it. If a picture is 1,000 words and you're processing hundreds of pictures, or at least tens of pictures in your mind, right? How many words are you processing in that same time? And that's one of the dilemmas. If you have the gift of visioning, you are bringing so much information through so quickly. And you also, by the way, these people are three-dimensional in their minds. Okay, so they can actually picture things in their head and turn them around three-dimensionally. It kind of makes my head hurt to think about that. But words come into your brain in a linear manner, right? One at a time, across a line. It's two-dimensional and it's linear, and it's much slower. Now, I know some schools are different, and I know we have some people here from Montessori, and I know Montessori is different. But in a lot of schools, what do we think is really important in terms of the way kids learn? Is it reading and writing, or is it pictures? Reading and writing at the high school level, right? Yeah, as you go through school. Okay, and by the way, I'm not against reading and writing. I love to read myself. But you can understand that a child who thinks in pictures is going to have a gift that's in conflict with an environment that's asking him to do, or her, to do most of their work in the written word. And the interesting thing is, this child can process faster than what you're asking him or her to do. Yet, so often, we think the bottom 80% is slower. Right? Okay, the second gift I want to talk about is exploration. So these are people, kids, adults, who like to explore, as the word says. But the interesting thing here is they don't like to be taught. They love to learn. They just like to teach themselves. And I see some of you know someone like that. One girl, her name is Tara, has the gift of exploration. And from the time she was very, very young, she did not want to be taught. She wanted to do things for herself. She wanted to learn for herself. And one example of that was swimming. She refused to take swimming lessons. But when she was in 7th grade, she made the competitive swimming team in a very competitive town. See, it wasn't that Tara didn't learn to swim. She would watch other kids swimming. She would observe what they were doing. It's just she didn't want someone teaching her. She wanted to learn it for herself. Third gift I want to talk to you about is grace. So these are kids who have the gift of ease. They remain unruffled in social situations, on the athletic field. They're gifted athletes, but it's really interesting that this gift of grace actually translates not just on the athletic field, but also into social situations. And one thing that I found really interesting about these kids, is that they are often told that they are slow processors. So it's not that they can't learn. They can learn. Just for whatever reason, they take it in a little bit more slowly. Brandon was one of these kids. Brandon, no matter what sport he did, he was a star. He had this ease of motion. He just looked relaxed doing it. He just looked like he was having fun. He was. As an example, 7th grade, he was asked to be on the high school varsity tennis team, 7th grade. He's just a gifted athlete, but he didn't want to. He wasn't really that interested in competition, actually. He just liked playing sports for the fun of it. But in the classroom, Brandon was told he was a slow processor. And the interesting thing was, like, in context, with stories around it, Brandon had no trouble learning at all. And he could take in the information. He just took it in more slowly. It wasn't that he wasn't intelligent. He just took it in more slowly. Now, one thing that I find interesting is, are some of you aware of, like, professional athletes and really good athletes? Do you know that they can actually slow things down in their mind's eye? Do you know that about them? Some of you know that? So I haven't studied this. I'm just telling you that it's kind of an interesting finding to me, that I found that these kids who are said to be slow processors are also gifted athletes. And it just makes me wonder whether that ability to slow things down in your mind's eye could potentially have anything to do with that. But I don't know that, as I'm saying. I just find it very interesting that that's what happens to go along with this gift of grace. Fourth gift I want to talk to you about is manual dexterity. So what do you think that means? Good with their hands, right? Manipulating anything, putting things together, taking things apart. Right? So Michael was a kid like this. And Michael's history teacher told his mother, you know, this kid gets Roman strategy and battles better than anybody I've ever seen. Well, Michael would lay everything out, like with little soldiers, and put them on like a map on the table. And so he'd lay everything out physically. And then he'd retain it, and he'd really get it. And so he's in the classroom, and the teacher's thinking, wow, you know, you don't do very well on tests usually, Michael, but you can explain to me this strategy, and you know about all these battles much better than the other kids in the class, because he would do it with his hands. The fifth one is self-clarity. Now, these are kids who are so comfortable with who they are that they are not afraid of strengths in other people. They will tell you who they are. They're not embarrassed of their weaknesses. But they will not change who they are to fit a mold that you ask them to fit into. Okay? They're very comfortable. They know who they are. And Tony was a kid like this. So Tony, when he was 16, went to a camp, and he was on a team with another boy. And Tony was comfortable saying what he's not good at. So Tony said to the other kid, these are the things I'm going to need you to do on our team, because those are things I'm not very good at. And here's some things that I could do for our team. Well, Tony and his friend, or his teammate, created a robot that could dive to the bottom of the pool, pick up a small object, and bring it back up to the surface. Most of the college teams at that camp failed at their assignment. Tony was 16 years old. And he was not a particularly good student. The sixth one I want to talk about is insight. So these are people who will just see things in a situation that others don't. They'll just get sort of flashes of genius, I call it, or flashes of insight, where they'll see something, they'll get to the heart of an issue, or they'll see something from an angle that no one else is seeing. One of my clients, Jessie, has the gift of insight, and she said, you know, I just think differently from other people. And that's one of her struggles. The way she's being asked to think in the classroom is in conflict with the way her mind works. Okay? I mean, how often in a classroom are we willing to just say, oh, that came to you in a flash of brilliance? Great. Don't show me your work. Don't show me how you got there. It just came to you, right? It's tough sometimes for a kid like that. But she's got a great gift. Next one is self-motivation. Okay, that should be pretty self-explanatory. Well, what do we usually say about the top students? We usually say that top students are pretty self-motivated, right? And bottom 80% aren't always in the category of, we think of, highly motivated. Is that typically the kind of thing you hear? But there are kids, the bottom 80%, who are highly self-motivated. One of the things about motivation that you need to understand is that the highest form of motivation is actually where your desire and your will are aligned. In other words, you're doing things for the joy of doing them. That's one of the highest level of motivation. So there are kids who will work unbelievably hard when they're interested in something, but external rewards don't do anything for them. So teacher opinion, grade, that doesn't really ring their bells. And the interesting thing about this is that external rewards are, in fact, a lower form of motivation. Okay, it's coming from outside of you. Something from outside of you is motivating you. And one kid like this was Matt. So Matt, if he was interested in something, he would sit down with a book and read for hours and hours and hours and learn all about it. Matt was a C student in school. Didn't care about lots of things, wasn't interested in some of the stuff he was supposed to do. Had 140 IQ. He's in the bottom 80%. And the last one I want to talk to you about is the gift of oratory, the spoken word. Now, have some of you heard of multiple intelligences? Yeah, some of you have? Okay, so Howard Gardner has done the world, I think, a fabulous service by explaining to us that there's different ways of being intelligent. There's multiple kinds of intelligence. And I think that's phenomenal. And I think his work is very valuable. One of the things I found as I looked at it, though, was that there were some places where these gifts go to a different level than just the intelligence. So for example, he has a language intelligence. And I think what you're starting to see here from what I'm talking about, and certainly with oratory, there's different kinds of language intelligence is what I found. So the gift of oratory are people who are great with the spoken word. They are not necessarily people who are good at reading and writing. And then you get into things like foreign language, sign language, other kinds of language, and different gifts apply there. But yeah, oratory doesn't necessarily go along with the written word. So one girl, Laura, had the gift of oratory. And Laura was completely disorganized. So she was in 7th grade, and she just had a terrible time pulling things together. Or, for example, she had done a presentation for class, and she was all excited about her presentation, and then left the flash drive at home. Just that kind of thing always happened. So in 7th grade in her town, they had to do a special research project. Every 7th grader had to do it. And you could pick any topic you wanted. It was kind of your first big research project. So Laura's parents begged her. I mean, imagine a kid who's just really disorganized and forgets to bring everything to school. They said to her, why don't you pick a topic that would be easy to find information on? Where you could get books easily out of the library, or that we know people or something. Well, Laura had no interest in that. Laura wanted to find out about, she decided to study Assateague, where the wild horses run in Virginia. And her parents thought, oh my God, here we go again. I mean, we know nothing about this. We don't know anybody that knows anything about that. No problem. 7th grade Laura gets on the phone, calls the Chamber of Commerce in Assateague, asks them some questions. They tell her she should call the Park Service. Picks up the phone, calls the Park Service, talks to them, gets them to give her the phone numbers of some park rangers so that she could call them at home on Saturday. She can talk to anybody and she can talk people into a lot too. She just had no fear. She also said to her parents, oh, I sort of remember these friends of yours that were from Maryland mentioned that they had friends that were from Virginia. I think I'd like to give those friends a call. Picked up the phone, called them. She could talk to anybody. She could craft an argument. She could persuade. Gift of oratory, but not good with reading and writing. Okay, so I say that these gifts are in conflict with school because I know that there are some schools that are different, but in general, what we're asking of kids, and I was looking at adolescents, okay, so between the ages of 11 and 18, and in general, and you know, I thought that way when I was going through school. I thought that way when my kids were going through school. I thought, you know, if you can read and write really well, that means you're smart. If you get A's, that means you're smart. And I started rethinking my thinking. Let me just ask you guys, have you ever known somebody who was really very smart, but didn't show it in school? Some of you have. Any of you known someone who you thought was actually quite bright, but you couldn't see it based on the work they did in the classroom? Anybody known some people? Some of you have known people like that? Well, imagine being a boy who loved to think in pictures, but being told that you were peculiar because you didn't speak until the age of 3. That describes one young boy. So when he would go to school and the teacher would ask him to answer questions on a test, he'd be at a loss because the words on the page wouldn't match pictures going through his mind. And not only that, the teachers would often ask him to memorize. And he had a terrible time with memorization. So year after year, he'd do very badly. He'd get terrible grades. Now, what do you think a kid like that might start to say to himself? I'm dumb. I give up. I'm not normal. Yeah, he was a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. And nothing clicked for him. So when you think about the kid that some of you were thinking of someone who's bright but doesn't do well in the classroom, how do you think these kinds of thoughts affect those kids? Lowers their self-esteem? I would think so. What is it? Discourages them. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you how it affects some kids. There's a piece of good news in this, and that is we all, but kids in particular, adapt to maintain our integrity. In other words, we are resilient. We are resilient beings, and kids are resilient. It's just that it doesn't always look the way you think resilience would look. Okay, so when kids are told to do things that conflict with their natural interests and abilities, or when they've failed to meet expectations, and they think that, or they expect that they might fail again, they will do something that's very healthy for them. They will protect their inner core. Okay, when they feel that who they really are is threatened, they protect themselves. The way they do it doesn't always look pretty. And my advisor is Dr. George Valiant, and one of the things that he has demonstrated is that there's a range of what are called in traditional psychology defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms. You've all heard those terms. And what he has shown is that all coping mechanisms are healthy for the individual. All of them. If you think about it this way, you cut your hand, okay? and then it starts, you get a cut on your hand, and then it starts to heal up a little bit, right? So it might get kind of ugly and a little bit pussy, something, right? And then it heals over with a scar. First a scab, and then a scar. So along the way, it looks pretty ugly, right? But it's your body healing itself. Well, it can be very similar with psychological coping mechanisms. They can look ugly to the outside world, but they're actually protecting the kid. They're helping the kid heal. And so that can be a reason, I realize, that kids act out. Right? If they feel threatened, they may act out. Anger is a healthier place for a kid to go than depression. But let me tell you, depression is more pleasant for all of you to live with. I know it wouldn't sound that way, but if you're with a school full of kids who are quietly depressed, it's a lot easier than a school full of kids who are loudly angry. And I'm not saying anger has to be acted upon either, but anger is a better place to go for the child. So it can actually be a healthy thing, even though it doesn't look good. And acting out could even look like not studying for a test. Think about it. What would you rather say? I failed because I didn't study, or because I'm dumb? So basically, the point I'm making is kids are resilient, they do adapt, but it does not always look pretty. Yes?
I was just wondering if you had like a specific goal or intention where you want to take this insight. Is there a place, like, is this something that you want to bring to school systems?
Oh, that's a great question. So the question, okay. So the question is, do I have a particular goal with where I want to take this, and do I want to bring it, in particular, do I want to bring it to school systems? So that's a great question. When I did the research, my only intent was to make some statement about kids who were not good in school. I wanted to uncover some things that were good about them. That was my only intent, and I knew I could find something that was good about them. I had no idea it was going to take me here, but I knew I would find some strengths in these kids. That was my first intent. But then, of course, I fell in love with these kids. I fell in love with the rest of what you're going to see tonight in terms of what's possible for them. So what's happened is my goal currently is really to speak to, I do speak to educators, but I speak to also a lot of parents, community leaders, and students themselves, because there's different levels at which we can think about this. So my first interest is just helping kids to see themselves in a new light, to understand that, in fact, it's not because there's something wrong with them. I was in classes today, and I set the kids up to do this, but I said, okay, let me tell you about a kid who's a C student. What can you tell me, and I think I said what's wrong with them, or I said, what can you think about him? And of course, they could list off learning disabilities, they could list off, problems at home, they could list off motivation issues. That's what we usually think of when we think of kids who aren't good students. So my goal is to help those kids see that it's not what's wrong with them that's the problem. It's what's right with them that doesn't fit with what they're being asked to do. So that's my first goal. And then beyond that, wherever, to the extent that, and there are some schools that have expressed interest. Actually, I did speak to teachers and administrators at a school in Australia, but it was a private school there, but they were.
Are you kind of advocating this in schools?
I'm not pushing anything. I am sharing the research, showing people, and tomorrow night I'm going to show you some more about the system and what I explain to people about the system, because it goes beyond these kids. It goes to like all the kids, and it also goes to how we structure things in our communities. But my background is leading positive change in big organizations. So, for example, I've started working with the town of Wellesley, which is where I live, and we've created a big community change project, and a couple of other towns have begun to talk to me about that. But I'm not pushing anybody to change anything they don't want to change. What I want is for us to be able to see how fantastic these kids are, and for the kids to see how fantastic they are, to see what the possibilities are for them, and to provide some relief at the first level to the people who love these kids, work with these kids, and then the kids themselves. So I'd like you to, right now, to think of somebody you have known or you know now who hasn't done well in school. Okay? Maybe they didn't appear interested, maybe they didn't appear smart, maybe they didn't appear motivated. Okay, so think about someone that you know. Could be an adult, could be a kid, doesn't matter. And I'm going to show you the list of gifts again. I'd like you to think about which of those gifts that person might have. I understand that you may not know, and for example, my own daughter had the gift of visioning, but I didn't know because I didn't know enough to ask her, does she think in pictures? Now, had I known about these gifts, when she told me that in geometry she could take something in her head and turn it around three-dimensionally, when I got the brain cramps listening to her, I would have probably figured out that she had the gift of visioning. But, so I know you might not know all the gifts that somebody has, but I'd like you to just think for a minute. Which gifts do you think that person might have? Have you seen him or her use the gift, and how? So I want you to think about that, and then I want you to turn to a couple people near you and share. Tell them a little bit about the person, and then tell them a little bit about how they've used a gift. So I'll give you the list of gifts again. Okay? So again, think of somebody that doesn't do well in school or didn't do well in school for this exercise. Okay, so what did you come up with? Anything you're willing to share? Yeah?
We're talking, my son is...
Can you speak up?
Yep, my son is 11, and in school he does very well. He's like a human calculator with math, loves it. And so last year the teacher said to him, I know you get the answer and it's correct, but I need to see your work. And he goes, I can't do that. It was like it was slowing him down. He said, for me to sit and do that, I just can't. So she said, well, I need to see how you get it then. He goes, I can't tell you how I get it. I just know it. So that was what we were
Classic.
saying about visioning. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Great, thank you. Anyone else have something that they're willing to share or something that they heard? Yeah.
I had a friend in high school, and he did bad in school in his classes, but he was really good as an athlete, like in football and basketball. Like he was like awesome. He was like the captain of both teams. He was in high school. He goes to college now, but he's great at like ceased to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you could see that he was a gifted athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you notice? Do you know whether he had any slow processing or anything like that? Or?
I'm not totally sure.
Yeah. 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 Great. So it's fun to see that. Right?
My sister, she's really good in geometry, but when it comes to algebra, like she just can't do it. And then like she's really good with pictures and poetry, but when it comes to writing essays, like it's not her thing.
Yeah. So what gift did you think she had?
She probably visioning.
Yes.
I'd say.
Yes, that sounds very much like a kid with visioning. I don't know if you heard in the front of the room, but she said that her sister is very good at geometry, but not good at algebra. This really has a lot of trouble with algebra. And is great with poetry, and what else did you say?
Pictures.
And pictures, okay. But, so great with poetry, but not very good at essays. Classic dichotomy there. Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a kid with visioning. Anyone else? Yeah? Oh, sorry.
Question. Because my son scores very high in math. How do you integrate him into a system that's not looking for that? They're looking for, and I'm sorry, but looking for pigeonholes. Put you in a box, put you in a box, put you in a box, put you in a box.
Right.
But he has the same thing.
Right.
Teacher says, you got to show your work.
Right. So what do you do in that case?
Right.
And I mean, he's scoring, we had him tested. He's superior.
Yeah.
But they wanted to have him do a math tutor.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. How do I integrate?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you say
we
to
do
your
that?
son's teacher, well, my son is a visionary?
Well, I mean, so I do suggest talking with teachers.
Sure.
And try to help, because a lot of teachers love understanding these kinds of things, right? And they want, teachers generally, the ones I encounter, really want to do the right thing for kids, help kids learn. So I think a lot of teachers would be responsive. I don't know whether they're going to say, okay, you don't have to show any work. I think that's going to be a learning curve, but some might. And some people get it. But the other thing is, yeah, I don't know right now how you fit a kid like that in. I don't know that you can. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But what I do know is that you can talk to a child like that. And you can say, I see your gifts. Do you see your gifts? Let's talk about how you like using them. Let's talk about what's good in you. Let's talk about some of your strengths. Let's talk about where you might like to go with this in the future. Right? So you can talk with the kid, and they can feel good, even though they don't necessarily fit into that system. The truth of the matter is, the more people I talk to, the more I find, nobody feels like a perfect fit to any system. So there's probably a lot more kids right around your sons who aren't feeling like a fit either. There's probably a lot of kids. Not for the same reasons, for different reasons, but not necessarily feeling like they fit in.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Yes?
It makes me look at one of my best friends from high school a lot differently because in classes he didn't do well in any subject at all, ever. He always just didn't do his homework, didn't care about tests, would just hand it in blank with just his name on it. But he plays every sport and he's amazing at every single sport. And when it comes to like Sudokus or whatever, he can solve like the extra hard ones within like a minute.
Oh my gosh.
Because I don't understand it at all because I can't even do that and I was really surprised.
Yeah.
It makes me look at him really different.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, the Sudoku one I haven't heard before. That's amazing. Yeah. And so that's our point tonight, is that usually what happens with kids, and watch as you go home, as you go back into your offices, wherever you're going, into your classes, watch the language. Start to notice what you hear in the bread line, in the gym line, right, in the locker room, wherever. Notice what you start to hear. Because when a kid isn't a top student, we are often talking about what's wrong with them. And we have a lot of great labels for it. And by the way, I'm not opposed to special ed at this point in our juncture because I think it's great that we have places that kids who aren't learning the way they want to be in a regular classroom have a place to go. But the idea that there's something wrong with them and they need a special education, that's the only thing I take issue with. It's not what's wrong with them that we should be talking about. It's what's right with them. And let me just talk to you a little bit about where this could go. So remember earlier, I talked to you about the boy who didn't fit, the boy who thought in pictures, okay, was a terrible student. So this continued. This continued into high school. He got poor grades, couldn't get into the college that he wanted to go to. But finally, his parents found a school that taught to visual learners, people with the gift of visioning. And finally, everything clicked. He fit. Now, if you think about the student you were thinking about a minute ago, what do you think might happen for that student if he or she could learn in a way that fit? What do you think would happen for that kid? They'd be more successful. Happier. I think they would find that aha moment, like, I got it, I have a very good gift, I'm able to learn. Yeah, aha, I've got a gift, I'm able to learn. I'm sorry, there was one up here.
I said higher self-esteem.
Higher self-esteem. Yeah. Well, let me tell you what happened with this boy. Fast forward a few years, and he starts asking himself questions. Like, what would it look like if I were riding on the end of a beam of light? Anybody know who I'm talking about? Einstein. Albert Einstein. Okay. Albert Einstein is the result of a good fit. And look what he says here. He says, the words or the language as they are written or spoken don't seem to play any role in my thinking. Isn't that extraordinary? Don't seem to play any role in my thinking? And yet, what do we tell kids they have to use for thinking? Right? It's language. And again, I'm not opposed to language. I happen to be one of the people who tends to be better at language, certainly a lot better than thinking three-dimensional pictures about riding on the end of a beam of light. But, I mean, Einstein, he's the result of a good fit. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, Einstein, I mean, he's a genius. Are you saying, like, our kids could be geniuses? That's actually exactly what I am saying. What I'm saying is that there is genius there, and it's usually untapped. It's usually not a fit, and often the kid doesn't even realize that it's a genius. And so what I'm talking about is how can we help more kids to find the genius within them? So I want to pause here for a second, and I want to ask you, because as I go into where we're going next, I want to start with thinking a little bit about what are our goals in educating kids? Like as a society, as a community, what are our goals in educating kids? And before I do that, I'm just going to ask you I want to give you a minute to think about it and talk about it a little bit among yourselves. So again, I'd like you to just turn to 2 or 3 other people and talk a little bit about what do you think our goals are as a community, as a society in educating kids? All right, so can we come back together? So I heard one story while we were all talking that Richard said he would be willing to share with you. So if you don't mind. Thank you.
Hello. I do work, have a nonprofit in Tanzania, in Africa. And everything that we know about Africa is probably true, that there's very few resources that are available. And this tiny village where I do work, the teachers have to really begin to focus on who has the potential to advance maybe in some of these goals that most educational institutions consider. And they almost have to pick and choose among their students as to who will get that kind of intense education, but not at the expense of the others that maybe don't have that same potential, but are really good with their hands. So in the village where I do work, we have kids that are studying all those academic subjects that we know, and then we also have kids learning, young girls learning how to sew, because they're really good with their hands. And they're really good at choosing fabric and making patterns and doing those things. So I was telling Christina that it's interesting that this little village in Africa is almost, in some ways, more tolerant and supportive of difference than perhaps we are. So it's just a thought.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. So what else? What did you guys come up with?
I want to know if any of the boys sew.
No, the boys don't, but they do. Well, Africa is a very boy-driven kind of society. They mostly have the opportunity to go to school versus girls. So the boys are encouraged to go to school.
Okay.
But hopefully the girls are going to make an awful lot of money with those things they're sewing. They're going to run the businesses. So what did you come up with for goals? What kind of goals do you think we have? There's no right or wrong here. I'm just interested in hearing what you think. Yes?
Well, we said educated youth would lead to educated adults, and in return they would have higher success rate, and then which will cause more financial stability, and then awareness of the surrounding, and then therefore better lives and all.
Okay, so educating them so that when they're adults they're more successful, so they have more financial stability, and then basically happier lives?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Better lives? Okay, great, thank you. What else?
We're saying now that we're noticing more magnet schools for the younger grades. that it's not all a cookie cutter society, that there's so many differences, and it's like a puzzle. Bringing together all different pieces, and they all come together nicely, but they're all very different. So-
Great, with magnet schools. So there's sort of different goals where we're putting in magnet schools to allow the different pieces of the puzzle to be in place. Great, thanks. Others? Yes?
I would have to say, I hope we're trying to encourage them to be able to pursue happiness on their own terms, while at the same time becoming self-sufficient in society.
Yeah, that's great. So pursuing happiness on their own terms while becoming self-sufficient in society. Great. So anybody else want to share something that we haven't talked about? Yes?
When I have conversations with business leaders about education, their whole focus is the education serves to provide a workforce, an educated workforce that's capable of doing good work out there.
Great. Okay, educated workforce, able to do the good work that the businesses need. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. All right, so if it's okay, I think these are some of the things I've typically heard from people, and if it's okay, I think these will generally cover some of the kinds of things you talked about, not in the same exact words, but basically the idea, and if it's all right with you, we'll work with these tonight. But basically the idea of, that we're going to educate kids to develop good character in them, to develop future leaders, to develop productive citizens, all with this idea that the kids are going to have better, happier lives than they would if we weren't doing this. Okay? Does that sound all right? All right, so here's one of the things that really shocked me as I did my research. I realized that the kids in the bottom 80% have precisely the strengths and gifts that they need for world leadership, for strong organizations, and for economic growth. And the reason I even was looking at these kinds of issues was for the very reasons that we were just talking about, because so often I hear that that's what we're thinking about with education, in that if you're not an A student, well, you're not a leader. Oh, I just heard this the other day. Somebody was talking about the teacher who picked the leaders in the class, and he told the class, you guys are the leaders because they were an AP class. And I thought to myself, okay. But so often, that's the kind of thing we're hearing. If you're an A student, you're destined to do something great. But if you're not, good luck to you. So what I found is that they innately already have gifts and strengths that they need. So let me just take you through a little bit of why I say that. So Peter Drucker, do you guys know who Peter Drucker is? Would somebody be willing to say? Yes?
He studied workplace psychology?
Mm-hmm. He did. Yes, he did. Anything more that we could say about him?
Like 20 years ago?
Yep.
80s?
Yeah.
70s maybe?
Yep. Yeah, management theorist, studied workplace theories, and probably thought to be, he's now dead, but probably thought to be the foremost expert in leadership in the last century. Certainly one of the world's experts in leadership. And so this is Drucker talking, not Christine, but what do you think he says are the two most important attributes of leaders? Visioning, that's a great one. It's not on his top 2 list.
I'd say a little bit about management, but maybe honesty and integrity.
Honesty and integrity is one of them, yes. Great. What do you think the other one is?
Good communication, being a good listener, and being able to speak to people.
Great answer. But, sorry, wrong answer. Okay. Not wrong by me, wrong by Drucker. Yes?
Positive role model.
Positive role model, another great answer. Not on his top 2.
The ability to listen?
Ability to listen, that's another great one. Sorry, didn't make his top 2.
Insight?
Insight is a good one. Not quite. I'll put you out of your misery. The second one, he calls knowing themselves. It's actually the gift of self-clarity that I talked to you about before. Right. So what Drucker says is that the best leaders know themselves so well, they're not afraid of their own weaknesses, and they're not afraid of strengths in others. and that they build a team around them that complements each other, and it certainly complements the leader. Okay, so they build people, they take people who have strengths in areas that they don't. Okay, bring them in. And then honesty is the other one. And he said Harry Truman was the exemplar of honesty. If he said yes, it was yes. If he said no, it was no. And people trusted him. And as a result, they would do anything for him. So those are the two that he says are the top two. Now, the reason I bring this up is I hope those sound familiar. Because honesty was on the list of strengths I showed you at the beginning, in the bottom 80%. And self-clarity is one of the gifts that I showed you. So there are clearly kids in the bottom 80% with great leadership capability. And anybody that has worked in any kind of environment with leaders, whether it's in business or in education, you know that you've seen people who were not good students, who were in the bottom 80%, and who were great leaders. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about for a moment is productive citizens. So this is research out of University of Michigan Business School. Jane Dutton and her associates, Kim Cameron and some others, looked at, and they've been looking at, organizations. So let me start here and talk about complex coordination, because they said that the best run organizations are very, very good at complex coordination. So raise your hand if you've ever worked in a large organization. Okay. And raise your left hand if you've ever worked somewhere where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Okay, so you know the need for complex coordination. You understand that. Yeah, the best organizations, most productive organizations are very, very good at complex coordination. But guess what they found out? Complex coordination actually depends on good relationships. That's the crux of it. And just to put that in context, some of you have probably known somebody who was superb technically, but not so good with people. Seen somebody like that? Okay, so that's not necessarily building good relationships. Okay, but good relationships are crucial to productive organizations, to the highest, most productive organizations. But here's what I really want to show you, is that good relationships, what they found, is that the foundation is the strength of kindness or compassion. And I hope that looks familiar to you, because it was on the list of strengths that I showed you at the beginning tonight. Okay, so this strength of kindness is the foundation of building a highly productive organization. There's another thing I want to talk about when we talk about productive citizens and productive organizations and where the economy is going. So there's a guy by the name of Richard Florida. I think he was originally like a city planner or something like that. I call him an economist. I'm not sure he's officially an economist. But he was at Harvard as a professor on his sabbatical. And he had actually set up a structure in Pittsburgh, because he was at Carnegie Mellon, which is in Pittsburgh. And they had brought the best minds together, and they figured out that to really get that economy going in Pittsburgh, they needed to bring together academia and business and education and all these different things. And they had set up the model, and they had brought these companies in. And then he opens the paper one day, and he sees that, this is back in the 90s, sees that Lycos is moving to Waltham, to Boston. And he's at Harvard, and he says, how could that be? You know, we brought Lycos to Pittsburgh, and we have the model all set up. Why would they be coming to Boston? So he went off and did a whole new body of research on what was driving this. And what he uncovered is something that he calls the creative class. And the bottom line of why, just so you know the end of that story, is the reason the company was moving to Waltham is because the creative class goes where the creative class wants to go, not where the company wants them to go. So the company comes to the creative class. And certain cities, and there's hot cities around the country, are better at cultivating an environment that brings out the creative class. But so he does this research on the creative class. And one of the things that he found, first of all, it's the fastest growing segment of our economy. Already, more than 30 million Americans are employed in the creative class, and it's going to grow for the foreseeable future. So that's one thing you should know. so often I hear people talk about, oh, jobs going out overseas, and oh, if the kids, if we don't prepare them right, we're not going to be able to compete with these other countries around the world and kids around the world. And what I see in the economy is that there are always new things coming, and this creative class is growing in a way that isn't always visible and isn't always talked about. But one of the things he said in the creative class, he said, creativity requires judgment. Hope judgment sounds familiar, because again, it was one of the strengths I showed you at the beginning tonight. Okay, it requires judgment. And he said creativity can be downright subversive. Okay? So it's a willingness to take risks. Have you ever known any kids in the bottom 80% who are willing to take risks or can be downright subversive? Yeah, they'd be a good fit. Now, the other thing I want to show you about the creative class is that the heart of it is something that Florida calls the creative core. And that's where new ideas, new technology, and new content is developed. That's what he calls the creative core. Look at this list of professions that fit into the creative core. We're talking about computers, math, architecture, engineering, sciences, education, arts, entertainment, sports, design, media. Is there not a career up there that someone in the bottom 80% could fit into? You might notice that education is a little bit lighter than the others. Because when I was first doing this work, that was the one career where I thought, well, I'm talking about kids who aren't good in school or don't like school, so maybe education wouldn't be a career for kids in the bottom 80%. And then my daughter was graduating from high school, and our superintendent of 10 years, who was beloved, was retiring. And he stood up and he talked to this group of kids. And first of all, it had been all the rah, rah, it's been so great, blah, blah, blah. And he stood up and he looked at these kids and he said, I know that for some of you, these have not been the best years of your life. He said, I know that because they weren't the best years of my life either. I didn't like school. I wasn't good in school. That was our superintendent, and he was a phenomenal superintendent. So then I realized the bottom 80% can actually do something in education too. But besides these careers, let me just show you this. The other piece that Florida talks about is that around the creative core is a group of creative professionals, people that are in supporting areas, such as business, law, finance, health. Okay, and I just happen to highlight business because my background, as you heard in the beginning, was business. And the bottom 80% can thrive in a business environment. I'm sure probably in some of these other professions too, but certainly there. Now, the thing I want to talk to you at this point is just, we talked about a better life or a happier life for kids. I'm just going to call it well-being for the moment. And I'm just going to talk about well-being. And what we know is that the strengths of zest, hope, love, and gratitude are the strengths most highly correlated with life satisfaction. In fact, there was a study of nuns at the age of either 18 or 20, right when they were going into the convent. And they were asked to write a little essay about their lives. 60 years later, when those nuns, when you look back at the essays from those nuns, the ones that had the most positive emotion, love, I was blessed, my life was joy, whatever, those kinds of words in it, those nuns were more likely to live longer by far. They were healthier by far than the nuns who hadn't had that in their essays. So we know, okay, that positive emotions have a lot to do with well-being, but in particular these strengths. I mentioned positive emotion, and then engaging your gifts and strengths. So when you use one of your gifts or your strengths in a new way, all right, or to accomplish something that you want to accomplish, that gives you a feeling of satisfaction. often what happens is when you engage your gifts and strengths, you often go into a state of flow. Have some of you heard that term flow? It's when you lose all sense of time. That's what I mean by when I say engaged. Okay? You're engaged, you're so absorbed in something, you lose all track of time. You don't necessarily have a lot of emotion when you're doing it, you don't necessarily feel joyful when you're doing it, but you are there. You are fully present with it. It may be hard to get your attention away from whatever it is. Okay? That is very, very important to well-being. So I often hear people talking about kids doing things other than their homework. And one of the things I say is, well, if they're sitting watching TV, I kind of agree with you. I mean, you know, a little catching up on popular culture maybe isn't such a bad thing, but TV in general is a little depressing, as I try to tell my children when they won't get out from in front of the TV. But if they're doing other things, other activities, and I would include video games in that. I would include building things, painting things, drawing things, even talking with friends, which frankly is a form of love. Okay, if it's, you know, unless it's a big fight with a friend. But a lot of times what kids are doing when they're not doing homework and they're not watching TV are activities that engage them. And that is a healthy thing for the kid. So, you know, I also, when my kids were coming through, I believed that doing homework was more important than doing some of these other things. Now I question that. So anyway, these are things that we know are really important to students' well-beings. And the final thing I want to say is going to any college at all. So there's this idea that every kid is supposed to get through high school and go on to college if they really want a good life, if they really want the best well-being that's possible. They're going to go through school and go to college. And ideally, a college that they've heard of and that has some sort of prestige. And there's actually a study that actually, again, my advisor has. It wasn't his study, it was done before him. But there's guys that have been followed, and it's all guys. They were a matched set to a group of juvenile delinquents. Okay, so you know in a study, you know you need a control group. So on every dimension, socioeconomic, family history, you name it, these kids matched up with a group of kids that were juvenile delinquents in the inner city. And they have been followed for many, many years. And the interesting thing is that these guys from the inner city, if they went to any college at all, they were on the same bell curve in life as guys that went to Harvard. They went to any college at all. So the idea that you have to go straight through high school and then immediately go to college, and it has to be a college with a certain kind of name and a certain kind of credential and a certain kind of score, just doesn't hold water. Okay, so those are the things that we know are important to well-being. And I just want to talk for a moment about some first steps that you can take, whether you're a parent, a teacher, or a student yourself, to help a student get on a path to well-being. So the first thing is to change your questions. And I said earlier that we are generally taught to think about what's wrong with this student. If they're not straight A's on 3 varsity sports with every extracurricular that will get them into Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, we ask often, I know not all of you do this, but I succumb to it myself at times, what's wrong with this kid? What's wrong with this kid? And I can tell you, a lot of times I'll be talking to a professional, and the professional will say, well, I think this kid has a learning disability, or I think this kid has that. I mean, there's just this immediate like kind of question and answer. The answer almost comes before the question. What's wrong with this child? And that's a place you can start. It's that simple. If you begin to ask the question, what's right with this child? What's right with this student? What's right with me? What's right with me? That's a very powerful change, believe it or not. I know it sounds really simple, maybe even a little simplistic, but it's not. It's very powerful. What's right with this student? The second thing that you can do is simply to appreciate a student's gifts and strengths. Okay? Just try to notice. You could ask the student if you want to, but you don't have to. If it's your own child, think through. What are some of the gifts and strengths that I see in this kid? Okay. Just you noticing them and valuing them. That's what I mean by appreciate. Just you noticing them and valuing them is incredibly powerful. If you want to share it with the kid, what you see in them, that's fine. It may or may not ring true. You know, sometimes you can see something in somebody that they don't necessarily see in themselves. But if you will pay attention and appreciate the gifts and the strengths in that student, there's a couple of things that happen. I mean, the first is you feel better. And that is actually incredibly important. Let me just ask all of you, have you ever had somebody in your life that you sensed really believed in you or really thought highly of you or really thought you had potential, but the person didn't actually say that to you? Have you ever had someone like that in your life? Have you ever had that feeling? Or ever had the feeling that somebody really loved you and saw the best in you, even though maybe they didn't say it out loud? A few of you have had that feeling? A lot of you have had that feeling? What does it feel like? They didn't tell you you're great, but you felt it, you sensed it. What does that feel like? Yeah? It's frustrating?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
I like to be complimented, and I like to know that my confidence can get boosted up because, you know, some people have low self-esteem, so they need to be reminded of their good.
Oh, okay. So for you it was frustrating because they didn't say it out loud.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. How about others?
Safe.
Made you feel safe. Fantastic. And if we think back to what I talked about when I talked about the acting out and the protecting yourself, when you feel safe, when you don't feel like your inner core is threatened, you don't have as much need, right, to adapt, to cope. Anybody else? What does it feel like to you? A strength in and of itself? Like you feel sort of stronger because somebody believes in you? Yeah. Yeah. So just that alone, the student in your life, whether it's you, your friends, your child, a student you teach, will sense that from you. They'll feel safe. They'll feel stronger. Hopefully they won't feel frustrated that you didn't say it out loud. That's okay. Of course you can say it out loud, but just that little bit is incredibly helpful. And the final thing I want to mention is a very simple exercise that's incredibly powerful. It's called 3 Good Things. And all you do is every night before you go to bed or every day at the dinner table. Generally, it's better to do it toward the end of the day, but you could even do it in a classroom. That would be fine. 3 good things that happened today. So if you're doing it for yourself, it's ideal to write it down and to write, what is something that I contributed to having this happen? I mean, it can be as simple as, you know, I turned on my alarm last night. I mean, it doesn't have, you don't have to have done anything monumental, but it's great to add the little bit like, what did I contribute to this? Because that kind of gives you a sense of control. But 3 good things. You can do it at the dinner table with your family. What are 3 good things that happened today? Now, the reason this is so powerful is because most of us are inundated with negativity, and negative emotion sticks to us. It's like Velcro, it just like sticks. And negative emotion weighs more in our mind, so it hits us harder and we hold on to it longer. Positive emotion is kind of like Teflon. It just slides right off us. There's more positive things that happen in your day every single day. I guarantee it, no matter what your situation is in life, there's more positive things that happen in your day every day but a lot of them just go by kind of taken for granted, unnoticed. So this calls your attention to a few good things that happened in your day. And it has actually been shown to help buffer against depression over a very long period of time, even after the exercise was stopped. So that's one other thing you can do. You can just do it for yourself. You could do it with your family. You could do it with friends. You could do it in a classroom. That's one other way that you could start on a path with a student toward well-being. Yes?
It'd be a wonderful thing if you could get the Daily News to do that at the end of the day.
That would be great. That would be great. I wish I could get the Daily News to do that. Yeah, we've talked about that today. My husband thinks I'm a nutcase because I really don't read the news very much, and I do not watch TV news. But you know what? I still find out major happenings. The fact is that billions and billions more good things happen every single day than bad things. But if you read the newspaper, you would never know that that's the case. There is something, by the way, called the Good News Network online, and it's actually substantive good news. Like, we might talk about something like your project in Tanzania, for example. But there is something called the Good News Network if you want news, but you would prefer that there was more good news. Okay, so I talked to you about changing the question. You know, instead of like, why isn't she doing better? Or what's wrong with him? Or how can we improve grades and test scores? Lots of questions that I typically hear. Let me ask you, when you look at that list of questions, how does it make you feel?
Inadequate.
Inadequate? You going to say something? Crummy. Yeah? Nervous. Yeah. Anxious. Okay, let me show you a different set of questions. How can we appreciate the best that each of us has to offer? How can we allow each student to have an outstanding development experience? Or how do we build a magnetic environment? How do you feel when you read those questions? Better? This is actually an approach to positive change. It is to change your questions to questions like these. Because they focus us on what are strengths that are there already. They focus us on what we want to do that's good. Instead of the other questions, often, you know, somebody said inadequate. They often make us feel kind of tired before we're even out of the gate. We're anxious. Right? Okay. In terms of appreciating the gifts and strengths, I talked to you about noticing gifts that students have. Notice how they use them. Okay? You might end up talking to the student about how he or she uses them. But even if you don't, just pay attention to it yourself. When the kid is not doing homework, see if they're using one of their gifts or strengths for something else. Notice for yourself, what do you enjoy most in seeing him or her use his gifts or strengths? One of the things about gifts and strengths is that they're uplifting. There's no competition. It's really interesting. People never feel jealous. Oh, that you've got that and I don't have that. They're all good. They're uplifting. That's the beauty of them. Okay, I talked about 3 good things. So let me just stop here and ask you questions. Comments? Yes?
We're talking about 80% of the teams.
Yeah?
The harsh reality, unfortunately, is unless you're Steve Jobs or Steve Wozniak, who never went to college, they're successful. I'm not talking about financially necessarily, but they're still faced with SAT scores. They're still faced with GPAs. A lot of the professions you suggested still have very objective criteria to become part of that family.
Yep.
Colleges and high schools are continuously being forced to deal with objective accountability. So what expectations would be reasonable to establish for a lot of these teens who might fit within this paradigm that would be reasonable to motivate them and mobilize resources to get them to be successful, but there have to be some kind of expectation. And as you're an MBA, you know a balance sheet has to balance. Sometimes things just have to be.
Yeah.
So what would be a reasonable expectation for a lot of these kids who are faced with college?
Sure.
And don't necessarily have that extreme entrepreneurial spirit like
Sure.
Steve Jobs or something. What would
Sure.
be reasonable?
Well, those are, wow, that's a big question and a set of great questions. That's okay. Did everybody hear it? Okay, so one thing I just, because you pointed it out, I want to just say one of my favorite quotes of all time. When I was in the world of business where we were working with Six Sigma, total quality management, that sort of stuff, is Dr. Deming, who's the one that is responsible for Japanese cars being so reliable that they never break down, because he brought stuff that the US didn't want back in the 30s to Japan and helped them do that. And one of my favorite quotes from him, because that's by the way, a field that's very quantitative and very measured, his quote is, "The most important things cannot be measured." And he was talking about in business. So that's my first level of response for the kids, is that the most important things for them, for their success in life, may be very, very hard to measure. Having said that, I know that we're in the world of SAT scores and GPAs and colleges and everything else. I have a feeling you're not really my answer's not going to be very satisfactory to you. I really believe that these kids can find their way. I really believe that they need support in using their gifts and their strengths and whatever else they want to bring to it. I really believe in following their interests, what interests them. And if they're at the point where they've kind of given up and they don't have a lot of interests anymore, because they've really just kind of given up, then finding ways to kindle some interest again, to fan some flames of it. I really, really believe, and part of it is because of all the people that I've studied and watched, but I think that's very, very important. So what do you do about SAT scores and GPAs? If the kid can take SATs, doesn't mind taking SATs, and can get a reasonable score on them and can get into a college of some sort, fine, take them. I wouldn't sweat it. I would tell the kid, and I ended up, creating a little program to explain to parents why it doesn't matter where you go to school. So that would be the first thing. If the child is somebody who can't take SATs, doesn't just, flubs standardized scores, standardized tests, then I would be talking to that child. I would be talking to them about the fact that that's not the only way to go, and that maybe you are somebody who doesn't want to go to college immediately after high school. Maybe working a couple of years would be a good thing for you. There's always a path in. There's always a way. There's community colleges, by the way, that take a lot of kids. And some of the kids come out of community college and go to Yale and Harvard, by the way. So, just because they go, to a school that you might not think is the type of school that you'd think a kid should go to, they can find a path. So I don't know if I'm getting at what the kinds of things you're wondering about or not, but let me stop there.
There's also a function of maturity, I think, is involved. And maybe they're just not mature to see their role in society at this stage, and aren't willing to put in the personal effort to meet whatever goals they need to establish for themselves, whatever their strengths are.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that, thank you for that. And tomorrow night I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. One of the things that can happen is kids can start to give up. And they can just be like, I don't know, I don't care, and that is not a place we want to leave them. So then it's the question of how can you kindle some kind of interest. And I'll just give you one this is so straightforward, it's a silly little example, but I'll just give you one little example. So when my daughter was, I think it was after 9th grade, and I didn't want her spending the entire summer sitting around. I had let her not go to camp the summer before, and she spent most of the summer fighting with her sister. So I decided that really wasn't the right model. So what I did was I said, I want you to go to some kind of camp. She said, I don't want to go to camp. I don't have any interest. So we went down a laundry list of camps. Nope. What other? Okay. I made her put ideas on the list. Eventually, we probably crossed out 20 camps she could have gone to. Finally, I said, computer camp. She said, well, maybe. She went to computer camp that summer. It was a well, maybe. If you get a well, maybe out of a kid that doesn't want to do anything, that's interest. That is interest. And let me just tell you the end of that story. She went to 1 week of computer camp. She thrived at computer camp. She was glowing. She got awards. She learned to program. She ended up doing the Girl Scout website. She ended up getting her gold award. I mean, all this because she went to computer camp. for 1 week because she said, well, maybe. So I know it's a very simple example, but I think with every kid, there's a way to find some kind of a well, maybe. And that's where I would start. I don't know, again, if that's really quite answering your questions. There's not a blanket answer for 80% of the kids, and I know that we're in a structure that isn't going to change in the short term, so it's just a matter of finding ways that work around it. But if you want to talk afterwards too, by the way, I'd be happy to. Other questions, other comments? Yes?
I have a question about children living in poverty. Do you think they have the equal chance of bringing out their intelligence, or do you think they're like undermined and they don't have the equal chance?
Okay, so kids who are living in poverty. Well, that's a really great question. I did not study kids living in poverty, but I have been asked to talk several times to groups of people who work with kids. Like, for example, there's a huge social services agency in the Boston area that does a ton of stuff and even has kids that, like, provides residences for some kids. They think this is very relevant for those children. Whether they get the opportunity all the time at home or in their school environment, yeah, probably not. Some of them do find their way, but I think it's possible for them, but they may not always be getting it. And again, for all of our kids, sometimes it's a matter of really educating ourselves and understanding what we do want for them and whether what we've been telling ourselves is most important is in fact the most important thing for their well-being long term. Did that answer your question? It probably wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes?
It's a comment and a question. Okay. Professionally, I found this very enlightening. It worked well for me. 30 years I've been in education. But personally, I found it much more meaningful because when I was in school, in high school, at a very high-performing high school, I was told I could go in the service or get a job, but I'd never be able to go to college. I was fortunate enough that I had involved parents, and I ended up in a prep school. And one of the things, one of the teachers in the prep school, or we called them masters there, said to us was, my A students are not my best students because they're restricted to coloring within the lines. They need to have everything done. He said, my B, C, and D students will be successful. But if you can't get a D, you don't have the tools to learn how to play the game. So my question to you is, while we're talking about the bottom 80%, would your stuff still have the same results if we were talking about the bottom 40%?
It's a great question, and thank you for sharing. I appreciate you sharing your story. My answer is unequivocally yes. There's actually a guy who's he started doing a documentary. It's not finished yet, but he was looking at people who graduated last in their class. Last. So that's not the bottom 40%, that's the bottom 99th percentile, okay? Or 100th, I don't know. And some amazing, amazing people have come out of that. So this absolutely holds true for kids in the bottom. And if they're getting Fs, actually, there's a girl, I'm just reading a book called Breaking Night. And it's a girl who ended up homeless at age 15 in New York City and didn't even go to, I think she went to one high school class before she was the age of 17. And all of her middle school grades were like Fs and ended up going to Harvard. So I absolutely think this holds true. Whether the kids, get the encouragement and find the right place as you did and all of that, that's another question, but I do think it holds true for them. Thank you for that. I know the time is getting late. I'm very willing to stay and answer more questions, but what I'd like to do is just give you one last story and then call it a night until tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, by the way, we're going to be talking about getting beyond myths. So we've been talking about the bottom 80% up until now. Then my research took another turn that really surprised me. And we're going to be talking about some things that affect every student, including kids at the top of the class, and how we get beyond those myths. So, but for tonight, I just wanted to talk to you one last story about a boy who was very good with his hands, okay, had manual dexterity, loved learning hands-on. He actually went to a one-room school in the Midwest. And in high school, he was a C student, and he ended up dropping out. He didn't like school. He went to work in the local Boeing factory, and he was helping to assemble engines. And he became fascinated with the engines and with the technology behind engines. And so eventually, he went back to college. And then, after he got back into college, he got so excited about what he was doing, he went on to graduate school and eventually got a PhD in economics. And because this guy loved doing things with his hands and loved learning with his hands, when he was teaching his own course as a professor, he set up his room as a marketplace. And he proceeded to teach the kids the leading economic theory using this marketplace. Unfortunately, it didn't work. It was a mess. So he tried it again. And what he discovered is that the theory didn't work in practice. What a surprise. Anybody that's been in practice. But, so he realized that there was something wrong with this leading economic theory. And so he then figured out how to make the marketplace work. And as a result of that, do I have his picture? Oh, I don't have his picture here. Well, I'll just tell you. As a result of that, he won the Nobel Prize in economics. His name is Vernon Smith. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. Good with manual dexterity, high school dropout. Won a Nobel Prize. Thank you. Good night.